G'day folks, Wren here, and today we're going to go through all of the series I have started. Okay, so it is almost 2023, which means I am planning my new reading journal. So I track my reading in several different ways. I have a reading journal, a review journal that I'll be starting in 2023, and then I have a spreadsheet. Now on this spreadsheet I track all of the series that I have started, paused, and not going to continue. So today we're going to go through all of them because I need to put them into my new 2023 spreadsheet anyways. So we have 45 books in my not going to continue series. We have 45 in my maybe I'll continue series. And then we have 50 books in my yes I want to continue series. So let's get to them. So we're going to start off with a series that I have decided I'm not going to finish. And like, this is an entire list. We're going through my whole life here. So in around 2005-ish, I decided I was not going to continue the Harry Potter series. I got up to the 4th book and then stopped. And honestly, that's about all the information I'm going to talk about that series. Then in 2015, I had a couple more series that I was not going to continue. So the first one is Saga by Brian K. Vaughan. I got up to the 2nd volume of this and it just wasn't for me. Then we have Miss Peregrine's Peculiar Children by Ransom Riggs. I only read the first one in this and did not like the relationship that was going on. Then we have The Mortal Instruments by Cassandra Clare. I read up to the 2nd book in this, and while I enjoyed the series, I think I had kind of gotten to a point where I preferred watching the TV show. So I just did that instead. Then we have The 100 by Cass Morgan. I only read the first one of this. I did intend to read more, but just like with The Mortal Instruments, I preferred watching the TV show, so I just did that instead. And then the last one for 2015 that I decided to stop reading was The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare. I only read the first one and it was okay. I didn't really have any interest in reading anymore, so I didn't. Then we have all of the 2019 books that I decided not to read. So first we have Game On by Ollie White. I read the first one. It was a queer book. I really can't remember much of it, but the writing was a bit mediocre, so I didn't really want to read anymore. Then we have Fence by C.S. Packet. I only read the first volume of this, and while I really appreciate what the comic series is doing, it wasn't for me. Next we have Bitch Planet by Kelly Sue DeConnick. Again, I only read the first, I think I only read the first issue of this and wasn't for me. Then we have By Night by John Allison. Again, I only read the first issue of this, did not like it at all, and I'm not alone in that opinion. Then we have Sunstone by Stepan Sejic. That was awful. I'm so sorry. I only read the first volume of this and it was fine. Then we have The Cop and the Geek by Kat Blaine. I read the first one. It was fine. I think, again, the writing wasn't particularly great, so I didn't feel the need to continue. And then the last one for 2019 that I decided not to continue was Welcome to Night Vale by Joseph Fink. I read the first one and I was very confused, but I also did enjoy it. But I just don't particularly care to continue reading on, but it was a fun time. Okay, now for all of the 2020 series that I decided not to continue. So first we have The Illuminae Files by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. I really hated the first book and I didn't want to read anymore. Then we have the Creekwood series by Becky Albertalli, and I only read Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda, and I have no interest in reading Leah on the Offbeat because I've heard it is absolutely awful representation, so I'm not going to do that. Then we have All for the Game by Nora Sakovic. So I read The Foxhole Court because it was like one of these cult classic things. The writing bored me to tears and I didn't like any of the characters, which I know is the point, but I didn't want to read anymore, so I'm not going to. Then we have Chaos Walking by Patrick Ness. I read the first one, which is The Knife of Never Letting Go, and I think the writing of this is phenomenal. Like, if you haven't read the physical book, just like pick it up and look at it. It's done so well and it really helps create a really nice world. But there was an animal death. I'm just going to put it out there. There was an animal death and I'm not about that, so I'm not going to continue. Then there's The 100-Year-Old Man by Jonas Johansson. I was bored to tears reading this first one and don't want to read anymore. Then we have The 3-Player Co-op by Alison Lint. This was kind of a standalone, but also kind of part of a series. And I read the first one and it was good enough, but I kind of figured that the rest of the series would just be exactly the same. We have The Smith Brothers by Sheryl Gray. I read the first one, which is Mountain Man, and ooh, wasn't good. Wasn't good. We'll leave it at that. We have Demon Road by Derek Landy. I read the first book because it was kind of marketed to me as it's basically Supernatural, the TV show, which I was very down for. But there were some things I really didn't like and I really didn't care to read any further into it. It was just eh. And it definitely was not Supernatural vibes, so it's probably why I didn't like it. Then we have Santa Olivia by Jacqueline Carey. I read the first one because it was queer-ish, werewolf-ish. So I was really excited for it, but I was so bored and I didn't like really anything about it. So yeah. Then we have Odyssey by Matt Fraction. I really wanted to love this, but the only thing I liked about it was the color scheme. Didn't like the way the story was written and really didn't like the art style. It was just good colors. That's about it. Then we have These Witches Don't Burn by Isabel Sterling. I read the first one. It was fine, but only fine. We have Sliding Home by Elizabeth Perry. I read the first book and oh no, 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 no. No thank you. No thank you. Then we have Caught Up in Love by Lauren Blakely. Again, that's a big fat no. These were a lot of Kindle books that I was reading at some points and none of them were very good. We have Set Fire to the Gods by Sarah Rush. I was kind of confused about this whole story, so I didn't want to continue on. I may potentially reread this book at one point because I think I just missed a whole lot of what was going on, but yeah. Now on to 2021. First we have Blackbird by Sam Humphries. I don't really know if this has a continuation, but I read the first volume and I only really liked the color scheme and the art style. The story was very disconnected, so I don't actually know if there's a volume 2, but if there was, I'm not going to read it. Then we have Lux by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I read the first one and I was so excited for this because alien romance, very much wanted to read that, but it was like the bad kind of YA. Then we have The Bromance Book Club by Lissa K. Adams. I read the first book and there were a lot of things I didn't enjoy and I just did not want to read any more in that series. I wanted to read the historical fiction book that the club was reading in the first book so much more than I wanted to read the actual book that I was reading. Then we have Summoner by Taryn Matheru. I read the first book in this series. It's one of my niece's favourite series ever, so I wanted to give it a go, and things just weren't clicking with me. There were some definite good things though. The friendship between the dwarf and the person, loved that. I'm a fan of dwarves. But the rest of it I was like, eh. Then we have Briar U by Elle Kennedy. This is technically a spin-off of her off-campus series, but I didn't know that at the time. So I just read the first one in Briar U, and can we say sexual assault? It wasn't. wasn't my type of romance, let's put it that way. So I'm not going to read any more in that series. I am going to read the first book in the off-campus series though, but we'll see what happens with that. Then we have The Poe Detective Agency by Brian Yansky. This had such potential, but the writing was atrocious, so not continuing that. Then we have Experiment in Terror by Kaurna Halley. I was so excited for this book. I read the first book and it was awful. It was bad. I did not like it. I wanted paranormal investigation and that's not what I got. Then we have Across the Universe by Beth Revis. I read this first book and yeah, a big fat no from me. Nope, 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 no. Then we have Between Earth and Sky by Rebecca Rowanhorse. I read the first book and I did enjoy a whole bunch of it, but this is just the thing where a book is very much not for me. And so instead of continuing on, I'm just going to stop it and say I very much understand why people love Black Sun, but it's just not for me. Sadly, I really wanted to like this. Then we have Hush Hush by Becca Fitzpatrick, which, oh boy, big nope. Big nope. Again, I might have enjoyed this when I was an angsty teenager, but bad kind of YA. Then we have Edinburgh Nights by T.L. Hushu. I was really excited for this first book, but it was boring. And I didn't care for anything. I was very disappointed in that. The last book for 2021 was Between Ink and Shadows by Melissa Wright. This was marketed as the new Blood and Ash series. It wasn't that. It was boring. I didn't care about the relationship, so I'm not going to read any more of that. Now for the 2022 series that I have decided to stop. First we have Maple Hills by Tay Monet. I read this first book because a lot of people have seemed to really enjoy it, but I was not a fan of the romance. Then we have The Secret Circle by L.J. Smith. I did enjoy reading this and it was a fun time, but again, I would have loved this when I was an angsty teenager, which was about the time that I was watching the TV show, which I loved the TV show. It's very much just not my vibe anymore, and that's okay. Then we have Villains by V.E. Schwab. I read the first book and it was just fine, but I don't have any interest in continuing on with the story. We have Warcross by Marie Lu. I was really excited for this because everyone said it was just like Ready Player One, which I adore, but there were a lot of things in Warcross that I didn't like. The whole emphasis on the romance was the main part of that, so I don't want to continue. Then we have Drifting Dragons by Taku Kawabara. I read the first volume. I just could not deal with the descriptions of eating dragon meat. Then we have Nevermore by Jessica Townsend. I read the first one recently and it was just fine, and I found that by the end of the book I couldn't remember anything that had happened. Okay, now we'll move on to the books that I've put a pause on, and this just means that I might have read 1 or 2 books in the series and they were okay. If I felt inclined to pick them up, I would, but I'm not desperately wanting to continue them and they're not a priority for me. So these are just, I might get to them one day. So first we have How to Train Your Dragon by Cressida Cowell, and I read the first book in 2017 because I am obsessed with the movies and TV shows, but I think at the time I didn't realize exactly how different the books were, so it was really disconcerting for me, but I do want to continue this series. Then we have Psychop by Jordan Castillo Price. I read this in 2019 and I read the first book and it was okay. I liked enough of the world that I would be interested in continuing on, but there was something about the main character and the romances that made me not want to immediately pick it up, but it might happen one day. Then we have A Series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket. I read the first 2 books in this series, and again, it's one that it's a good time, but I'm not making it a priority. Then we have The Avant-Gardes by Carly Usden, and I read the first volume of this and it was fun, but it's one I'm not prioritizing. I'm going to say that after every one. Like, it was good. We have My Brother's Husband by Jingoro Tagame, maybe? I read the first one, it was okay. I just haven't been able to get a copy of the second volume. If I did, I'd probably read it, but I'm not desperate to try and find out how I can read the second one. Then we have Openly Straight by Bill Koinsberg. I enjoyed the first book enough that I might pick up the second one, but there were a few things in the first book that I wasn't particularly a fan of. Basically, the going back in the closet thing was a bit of a thing. Then we have The Jumbies by Tracy Baptiste. I really enjoyed the first book, and I don't know why I put this on my like maybe pile. And especially because I've recently seen Sasha reading the series and I really like want to continue now. But I think it was just at the time I thought it was okay, but then the longer I've had since reading it, I'm like, that was actually a really good book. So I might make that a priority in 2023, maybe, we'll see. Then we have The Blue Unicorn by Don Almond. This was an interesting book. With like orcs and elves, and it's queer and it's like dystopian. It was an interesting time, and like I could continue on with the series, but I think I'm still trying to wrap my head around the first book. Then we have Cassidy Blake by V.E. Schwab, and I read the first one, really wanting to like it, but I do think I have this thing with V.E. Schwab that just, their writing doesn't connect with me, but I am interested in giving the Cassidy Blake series another try. Then we have Dragon Clan by Sky Jones. This was an okay paranormal romance. Again, it's hard for me to get the second book, so I was like, if I manage to get the second book, I'll read it. If not, that's totally fine. Then we have Goldie Vance by Hope Larson. I've read the first and second volumes of this, and it's good, but I'm not a huge fan of the like Nancy Drew storyline, which is kind of what this is. Then we have The Mistress by Anna Stone. I did really like the first book, but this is again a case of I can't find a way that I can get the second book, so I just haven't read it yet. Then we have Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. I think I really should have put this in the cancelled section because the reviews for Ready Player 2 are awful and everyone's like, just don't read it. So yeah, I might move that one because I'm never going to read the second one. I'm going to just continue to thoroughly adore the first book and pretend that the second one doesn't exist. Then we have Wonder by R.J. Palacio. I read the first book and I do own the collection of the next, I think there's like 4 like little novellas after the series, and I do want to read them because I own it, and I did really enjoy Wonder, but I just haven't made it a priority yet, but I think I might make it a priority for 2023. Then we have Binti by Nnedi Okorafor. I read the first book. I enjoyed it, but I was really confused by the entire storyline. So I am intrigued to read more in the series, but I think I definitely have to reread the first one and take it a bit slower and try and like wrap my head around it before I continue on. Then we have Wolf's Mate by Kiki Borelli. I enjoyed the first book enough, even though the writing was awful, and again, this is a case of I can't get my hands on the second book, so I just haven't yet. But it's no real mess if I don't, because the writing was honestly pretty bad. Then we have Written in the Stars by Alexandria Bellafleur. I read the first book and I did really like it. It was very cute, but I didn't have the biggest desire to continue on with the series. But I think maybe I just need to like reread the first one and like rekindle the joy that I felt while reading it, and then I might want to continue. Who knows? Then we have Moonstruck by Grace Ellis, and I read the first volume and I really didn't like the romance thing that was happening between the two main characters. It felt very toxic, and there was also one of the characters kind of had this element of not loving supernatural creatures, and that kind of, I didn't enjoy that because I'm obsessed with supernatural creatures. So there's that. Then we have Voyeur by Fiona Cole. This was a good enough book. I did kind of enjoy it, and I would be interested in continuing on with the series, but again, I just wasn't able to get my hands on the second one. But there are definitely some problematic things going on in that book. We have Tea Dragon by Kay O'Neill. I did read the first one and it was okay. I'm not as obsessed with it as everyone else is. And it's very much just if I get the chance to read the next one, I will, but it was just okay for me. Then we have A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas. I've read the first book and I haven't continued on, even though I own the rest of them. I was not the biggest fan of the first book, so that's why I haven't continued on. And I'm a bit cautious about going into the rest of the series because everyone seems to be really obsessed with the character I hated most in the first book. So then we have the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J Maas. I've currently read just the first two as well as the novella. I am currently reading the third book. This is, again, I own all the series, all of the books in the series, so I will continue on. It started out as a series that was in my yes, definitely continue on series. But then after reading the second book, it moved into my, only if I feel like it. Because I really didn't like the second book, and the relationship in the second book is awful, and I really hate one of them main characters. Next we have Ice Planet Barbarians by Ruby Dixon. I've read the first 3 books. I do really enjoy this series. It's a fun time, and like that's all it really needs to be, is just fun. We have Wraith Kings by Grace Draven. I've read the first book and it's one of my favourite books of all time, but I think the parts that I enjoy the most about the first book aren't going to be in the rest of the series, because the rest of the series is much more focused on the plot of this fantasy world, whereas I was much more interested in this romance of people who find each other kind of disgusting. Then we have XCT by Sean Paulette. This, I read the first issue. I read like volume 0 or like a prequel or something, I don't know. But it's about gladiators, which I'm obsessed with. But this was like a and if I could get my hands on the rest of the series, I probably would read it. Then we have Elementals by Amy Kaufman. I read the first book and I got really confused about like the world, and it just felt very blah to me. Then we have The Alpha and His Ace by Anna J. Phoenix. I read the first one, it was fine. We have Hearts in Darkness by Laura Kay. I did enjoy the first one, it was a fun enough time, but I definitely don't think it needed to be a series. And it's a thing of, if I needed to, I will, but it doesn't need to. We have Egyptian by Roy Pond. I've read the first 2 books, and I don't really enjoy the series, but I appreciate the Egyptian mythology that goes into it, but it is very Christian heavy, despite it being about ancient Egypt. We have The Queer Principles of Kit Webb by Kat Sebastian. I really did enjoy the first book, but I don't think it needed to be a series, so it's like I may or may not pick up the next one, I don't know, but the first one was very good. Then we have The Singing Hills Cycle by Neve Vo. I read the first one and wasn't a fan, but I might need to go back and reread it because I did kind of speed read it at like the very end of 2021. So I don't know, but I also think it might just not be for me. Then we have Him by Sabrina Bowen and Elle Kennedy. I read the first one, it was really good. I'm surprised by how much I enjoyed it actually, but I don't think I really want to read the next 2 in the series because I like where it left off, because it was like happy enough of an ending, and I feel like there's going to be a bit more drama in the second book, and I don't really like drama. Then we have Sweet Rose by Jack Harbin. I read the first book and It seems like it's going to be a series, but I haven't heard anything about it since, so that's why it's on this list. But we have Sad Ghost Club by Liz Meddings. I read the first volume and I wasn't obsessed with it as everyone else seems to be. It was kind of very mediocre for me, but I could be persuaded to continue the series. We have Hellblazer by Jamie Delano. I read the first volume, I think, where it was like all in the 80s. I was mostly just really confused about what was happening. And that's kind of why I don't read a lot of like traditional comics, because I feel like I just get really confused with the storylines. We have the Lake Witch trilogy by Stephen Graham Jones. I read the first one and was very confused, but I liked it enough that I could be persuaded to read the rest of it. But I think I would have to go back and reread the first one to try and like wrap my head around what the hell happened there. Then we have The Woods by James Tynion IV. They are one of my favourite comic creators because they did the Backstages comics, which are some of my favourites. And I read this one, I read the first volume, and it's honestly basically that Netflix show Society. That's what it is. And I thought that TV show was just okay, and this was kind of the same. It was just okay. Then we have Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. Read Jurassic Park, loved it. I don't know if I need to read any more, but like I definitely could. It's probably one of the ones that's like on the top of the list of you could persuade me to read more. But again, it's not a priority. We have The Southern Reach by Jeff Vandermeer. I read Annihilation and thoroughly enjoyed it. And I do want to read the other two books in the trilogy, but I just haven't made it a priority yet. Which maybe I should next year. Maybe that should be a 2023 goal too. We'll see. Then we have Blue Flag by Kaito. I read the first volume and it was okay. And I feel really bad because I wanted to love this so much. And I know that Meredith loves it a lot, and it was just okay. I don't know, there was some relationship parts that I wasn't a fan of, but then there was some that I was, and I don't know, maybe I need to continue on for it to like get better. We have Versailles of the Dead by Kumiko Tsukan. I read the first 2 volumes, and after that second one, I am not reading anymore. I really enjoyed the first one, but then the second one just kind of went all over the place and kind of just like ruined the storyline, honestly. Then we have Beastars by Paru Itagaki. I read like 1.5 volumes. I really like the world of Beastars, but there was a lot of sexual things happening in that series, and it was problematic, to say the least, for some of them. But the world, I like the world. Can I get like a really wholesome version of that world? Please, and thank you. Then we have The Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. I read the first book, and again, I really liked the world, but there was some sexism things that weren't great, which I know kind of continues on in the series. So that's I wish it wasn't sexist, because then I would love it, because the world seemed really interesting. But yeah, doesn't treat women particularly great, so not a fan. Then we have Toilet Bound Hanako-kun by Adario. I read the first volume, and again, the world was interesting, but there was something about the romance that I didn't like. I have a theme here. And then the last one in the maybe pile is The Worm and His Kings by Hailey Piper. I read the first one and it was good. I could definitely be persuaded to read more, but it wasn't so amazing that I wanted to immediately continue. Okay, so for the series that I do want to continue. So first we're starting with one that I began in about 2007. and that is Summer Boys by Hayley Abbott. I read the first 2 books in this series, and I reread those books constantly when I was in high school, which is interesting. And I was like, I never really thought about them again until I saw the whole series at an op shop a couple months ago. So I bought them. So maybe I'll read them. Oof, it's gonna be interesting to read them now as an adult compared to like 15, 16-year-old me. Whew. Then we have Magic in Manhattan by Ali Theron. I read the first book in 2020 and really loved it, but I just didn't continue. And then it was actually one of my goals for 2022 was to read that series, and it hasn't happened. So maybe it needs to be a 2023 goal. We have Scales of Honor by S.J. Himes. I read the first book and I did enjoy it. It was fun. But there hasn't been any word about the next one, but it does say it's a series. So we have The Old Guard by Greg Rucka. I have read the first 2 volumes and the Collection of Stories volume, and I think there is going to be a few more volumes coming out at some point, so I would like to read those, but as of right now I am up to date. Then we have The Extraordinaries by TJ Klune. I've read the first book, I own the second book, and the third book only just came out this year. So I'm very excited to read more of TJ Klune's books, but I do need to reread The Extraordinaries first before I continue on. But it's probably going to be another 2023 goal. You're getting a lot of insight into my 2023 goals in this video. Enjoy. Then we have The Witch Boy by Molly Knox Ostertag, and I have read the first volume in this. I own the second one, and then I think there's only one more after that, but I haven't bought it yet. I don't know if there's any more, but it's very, very cute. Then we have A Modern Fairy Tale Duet by Skye Warren. I read the first book in 2020 and I really enjoyed it. It was like a Beauty and the Beast retelling almost, and yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a good little like romance book, and I think there's only one more book, but I just haven't been bothered to buy it yet, so I will one day. Then we have Class 6 by Fernando Valles. I've read the first 7 issues, but I haven't read any more because it's now starting to go into that thing which a lot of comic book series do, where it's like interwoven with other things and you have to read them in like certain orders, and it's getting complicated, but it is a thoroughly good superhero comic series with everyone being queer and fighting for queer rights. It's very, very good. Highly recommend. Then we have Gear Breakers by Zoe Hanna-Matuka, and I've read the first one, and the second book only recently came out, so I do need to buy that and read it, but it was awesome. It's got a bunch of mechas and found family and sapphic vibes, and it was very, very good. Then we have Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. I've read the first 4 volumes and I'm just waiting for volume 5 to come out. I know that I could read it for free online, but I like having the bound up editions. Then we have Wayward Children by Seanan Maguire. I am currently up to date. I've read the first 7 books and the next novella comes out in January. So I think it's every January a new book comes out, and I think there's going to be 10, maybe. I do have a few like short stories to read in that series though. There were like 3 short stories that I need to read. So I need to do that soon because one of them is a Christopher story. Christopher's one of my favourite characters. I want to read his story so bad. Then we have Tales of Rainier by TJ Klune. I've currently read the first 2 in that series, and I'm partway through the 3rd. And there is 5 books in this series, I think. Yes, this is a highly entertaining series. I have never laughed so much reading a book as I did reading that first book. Oh my gosh. It's hilarious. Then we have the Stargate Atlantis series, which is up there. All of them. They're all done by multiple authors. Where am I up to? So I've read the first 5. I'm partway through the 6th book, and I have almost all the rest, maybe? I think I've got up to number 13, and there's potentially 20 something. So I need to buy a few more of them. But I love Stargate Atlantis. It's my favourite TV show. I have a monthly TBR game about it. So I very much enjoy the series. It just takes a lot for me to read these books because they are only available physically, and physical reading for me has been really hard the past year. And we have Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I have read the first book and very much enjoyed it. I gave it 5 stars. The writing was beautiful. I do own the second book, and it's just a duology, but it's going to take a lot for me to read that second one because of how the first book ended. Then we have Royally by Emma Chase. I've read the first 2 books in this series, and they're a fun time. The second one less so than the first one. But there are 4 books in this series, and I think I might make that another 2023 goal. We have Hell's Library by AJ Hackwith. I read the first book and it was so amazing. It desperately needs to be a movie. So good. And I think I own the second one. Yeah, I own the second one, and I think the third book came out sometime this year. So I do need to reread those. I need to reread the first one and then continue on with the rest. I think it's just a trilogy. I'm not sure if it's any longer than that, but it's so good. Highly recommend. Then we have Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I have read the first 2 books in that series, and I am partway through the third book. This is kind of like those comic books where it is now going to start intermingling with a spin-off series called Flesh and Fire, which is like a prequel series. So I'm gonna have to, after this third book, I then need to read the first book in the Flesh and Fire series, and then I need to read the 4th Blood and Ash, and then maybe the next Flesh and Fire. I think it's gonna go like that after this. I'm not quite sure, but that's gonna be interesting. But I do love the Blood and Ash series. It's fun and it's good, and I love the romance. Then we have Maya and the Rising Dark by Rena Barron. I read the first book, and the second one came out this year, I believe, and it was really fun. I really did like it, and I do really want to continue on with this middle grade series. Then we have the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. I have read the first 4 books in this series, as well as the novella. I know they're all like a series of novellas, but then it's like a little short story. So I need to read, I think there's 2 more that have just come out. One's like a full-size novel, and then I think there's another novella after that, potentially. I don't know how many there's meant to be though, but super, super great sci-fi series. Then we have Princeless, Raven the Pirate Princess by Jeremy Whitley. I have read the first 2 volumes in this comic series, and it's so fun. It is peak feminist comic. It's so good. Female empowerment is like raging in this, and I love it. Then we have The Tales of Infia by Effie Calvin. I've read the first book and thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a great sapphic fantasy romance of convenience type thing. The world was really well done, and I'm really intrigued by it. I do own the second one, and then I think there are 3 more books after that. Then we have The Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. I've only read the first book, and it is a completed series. I think there's like 5 more I need to read, maybe. But it was good. Then we have The Naughty Divorcee by Calypso Hart. I read the first book, and it was really good, actually. For one of those Kindle books where like you don't expect it to actually be good, and then it turns out to be great, like, it was good. And we have queer rep in it, which is also great. Then we have The Dead Gin Universe by E. Jelly Clark. I have read the first 3 novellas in this series, and I think the next one I need to read is the official novel, I think. And then I think that would complete the series, maybe. Or there might be another novella. Then we have Lockwood and Co. by Jonathan Stroud. I have read the first book and really enjoyed it. I think there are 5 books overall, so I need to read the next 4. But it was a really great paranormal middle grade series, and it was like a lot more serious and kind of dark than I expected, which I very much enjoyed. Then we have Del Toro Quest by Emily Rodda. I've read the first book and it was a very fun time. I do own a bound up collection of, I think, the first 6 books. I can't remember how many books there are in the series. There might only be the 6. I'm not sure. But yeah, this was a great like middle grade fantasy that was just really quick and like quite fun. Then we have Holes by Louis Seisha. I always thought Holes was a standalone book and I loved it. The movie is also fantastic. But I did find out that there was a second book, and I did find it at a op shop one day, so I bought it, and it follows a different character, so I will give that a go. Next we have Lumberjanes by N.D. Stevenson. I have read the first 7 volumes of this and I really enjoy it. It's so fun. It's a middle grade fantasy paranormal comic series, and there's some sapphic rep in it, some trans rep, some non-binary rep, and it's just so fun, and the friendship that these people have with each other is so cute, and all these magical creatures, and I really, really love it. Then we have Cordelia Hatmaker by Tamsin Merchant. I read the first one earlier this year and thoroughly loved it. It was so good. Probably one of my top 5 middle grade series, and the second book did just come out this year, so I do need to read that. I think there might be a third, maybe. I don't know how long the series will be, but I will read as many of them as I can. Then we have A Touch of Taboo by Katie Robert. I read the first book in this series and they're more just like a connected standalone series, but it was steamy and like in a good way, and I very much enjoyed it, so I will definitely read the rest of the series. I think there's only like 3 or 4 of them. Then we have Well Met by Jen DeLuca. I have read the first 3 books in this series and the 4th one is coming out very, very soon. And this is probably one of my favorite series. I really love it. Just the romance set at Renaissance fairs, that is something I never thought I would be into, but then I read the first one and fell madly in love with the world, the characters, this little town. It's so cute. Then we have Fractured Shards by Dan Furigal. He starred in one of my favorite TV shows, which is Spartacus, and he was my favorite character in that show. He's gorgeous. Anyways, he recently came out with a comic series and I backed it on the Kickstarter. So I've read the first volume. I currently have the second volume, but I haven't read it yet. And I would assume that like a 3rd and 4th volume is coming out, but he's also just come out with like a spin-off series for it. So I'm gonna, again with all these comics doing these different levels thing, I'm gonna have to figure out the reading order, but it was a fun kind of sci-fi dystopian. We have House of Slaughter by James Tynion IV, coming up again. I read the like volume 0 of this, and yeah, I would like to continue on. It's a spin-off of his other series, which will be coming up very soon. But it follows like a different character, and yeah, I'm very much intrigued to continue on with this, but I think what I wanted to do was finish the original series first and then read this like prequel series. Then we have Soul Eater by Atsushi Okubo. This has become like my new obsession this year. I started it this year. I'm currently on volume 14. I think there's only 25 volumes, so I'm getting close. But this is the best series ever, honestly. It's got really good Halloween vibes. It basically is just Halloween. There's found family and like humans turning into weapons, and the god of death, and witches, and just magic, and it's just so good. And then we have Something is Killing the Children by James Tynion IV. I am currently on volume 3, and I think there's only 2 more volumes to go before this is completed. This is a really great horror comic, And it is what it says. There is something killing children. And you see that. It's a fun time. Then we have The Chosen One by Macy Blake. I have read the first 3 like short stories, like prequel short stories before the first book. I am planning on reading the first book by the end of the year, so hopefully that'll happen. But so far it's been just really, really cute, queer paranormal story. Then we have Death Note by Sugumi Oba. I have read the first volume of the Black Edition, and I own the second volume of the Black Edition. And then I think in these Black Editions there's a total of 5 or 6, and I will definitely be buying them all and reading them because they are so interesting. Just this whole idea of like a good person who is given ultimate power, and then by the end of it they're not going to be such a good person, and it's fascinating. Then we have Pet by Akweki Emezi. I read Pet earlier this year, and then the second book, Bitter, came out during this year, so I do want to continue on with that. I don't know if that's going to be a continued series or if it's just going to be those 2. But yes, it was a good time. Then we have Creepy Cat by Cotton Valent. I read the first 3 volumes of this manga, and there's only 4, and I'm currently waiting for my library to get number 4 in so I can read it. It's so funny. It's just a cat that is not like normal cats and can do many things like multiply and go through walls and stretch itself and just do some interesting things. And it's so funny and it's so cute. Then we have The Weight of It All by N.R. Walker. I read the first one a couple months ago, and there is a kind of like an epilogue in a way, like a little novella after it. So I think it's like their Christmas or something. Then we have My Hero Academia by Kohi Horikoshi. I have currently read up to volume 8, and I have several more volumes on my TBR right now. But I think this is not a completed series yet, and I think so far there's 20 volumes, but there's going to be more, I think. I love this series and I love the anime. It's so, so good. Then we have London Calling by Alexis Hall. I have read the first 2 books in this series, which Boyfriend Material is one of my favourite books of all time, and I recently read Husband Material. This is going to be a series that is going to follow different characters from now on. I don't know if it's going to like switch between multiple different characters as the series goes on or what, but I do love this series. It's a fun time, and I'm interested to read more in the series and to see where the series will go. Then we have Jujutsu Kaisen by Gigi Akutami. I have only read the first volume, but I am intrigued and I have more on my TBR currently, so I will be getting to more of that. It is interesting and a lot of people love it, so I'm really interested in that. Then we have Spy X Family by Tatsuya Endo, maybe? Again, I've only read the first volume, but I've got more on my TBR right now. I don't know how many volumes this manga has, but it's so, so fun, so cute. Like weirdly wholesome while also being about like assassins and spies and stuff, but it's very cute. The best found family, and I'm really excited to continue. Then we have the Lord of the Rings trilogy by J.R.R. Tolkien. So I've read The Hobbit several times, and I have read the first 2 books for the trilogy, and I know that it's technically like one whole book, but I read them as the 3 books, so I've just got Return of the King to go. Then we have Lost Touch Duet by Avita Weiss. I've read the first one recently, and there is a second one out. I don't know if it's going to be any more than that, but I do really like this like paranormal world. It sounds really interesting, and there is a romance in it that I'm also interested in. Then we have Timothy Blake by Jack Heath. I think this has 4 books currently. I think the 4th book was only released this year. I've read the first one, the second one is on my TBR. This is about a cannibal that helps the FBI, and it is amazing. It's so, so fun. Then we have Cells at Work by Akane Shizumu. I'm awful at these names. I read the first 2 volumes of this and it's really fun. I think there's only 5 or 6 in this particular series, but then there are some spin-off series which I also want to read. Then we have Supernatural Investigations by B.B. Alston, and I just read the first book and the second book recently came out, and I'm very much looking forward to continuing on in this series. It's so fun. And last up, we have Monster Tamer Girls by Mujirushi Shimazaki, maybe? I recently read the first volume and I loved it. It was so like weirdly wholesome of just these girls taking care of monsters. It's really great. But I do believe there's only 1 more volume left to go that I need to read. There doesn't seem to be any more. So I'm hoping to finish that by the end of the year, because that'll be good. Those were all of the series that I am either currently reading, in the middle of reading, up to date on reading, thinking about maybe continuing, and definitely not continuing. That was a lot. I am definitely hoping to get all of these numbers down by next year, or in next year. I really do need to focus on kind of reading some of my series. So if I have mentioned a series that you think I should prioritize, please let me know, because I need to get some of these read. And if you want to buddy read any of these with me, also let me know, because I need the push to read these things. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.